He was the most decorated sniper the United States Marine Corps never officially acknowledged. His name existed in no database, his missions were erased before the ink dried, and the men who sent him behind enemy lines were prepared to let him die there. What you are about to hear is the story they tried to bury. The story of one man who walked into the darkest place on earth, discovered the deepest betrayal imaginable, and chose to disappear rather than be used as a weapon against his own country. If you have never felt your heart stop in the middle of a story, today is the day. Stay until the end because the final twist will leave you speechless. And if you love your mom and dad, hit that subscribe button right now and show them some love. Every single subscriber means the world to this channel and to the people who raised you. His name was Cole Mercer. Not the name his mother gave him, not the name printed on any military record, and certainly not the name the enemy would come to fear. Cole Mercer was a construction, a carefully engineered identity built by the Defense Intelligence Agency over the course of 3 years, layered with false documents, fabricated history, and the kind of backstory that would survive even the most thorough enemy interrogation. But beneath the alias, beneath the cover, beneath every carefully rehearsed lie, lived a real man. A man who had grown up in the small town of Grayson, Kentucky, where summer nights smelled like cut grass and his father used to teach him how to shoot tin cans off fence posts with an old bolt-action rifle. A man who had joined the Marine Corps at 18 not out of desperation or lack of options, but out of a genuine, bone-deep belief that some things in this world were worth protecting. Cole was not born a sniper. He became one through relentless dedication, extraordinary patience, and a natural gift for stillness that his instructors at Scout Sniper School described as almost supernatural. Most recruits struggled to remain motionless for more than an hour. Cole could disappear into a patch of grass for 6 hours without a single involuntary movement, his breathing so controlled it barely registered, his heartbeat so disciplined that he could slow it deliberately during the moments that mattered most. He graduated top of his class. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and participated in 17 classified operations that were scrubbed from official records before the mission briefings were even cold. He had never missed a target. Not once. In 11 years of active service, across 3 continents and 4 different theaters of conflict, Cole Mercer had never once placed a bullet anywhere other than exactly where it was intended to go. By the time the Defense Intelligence Agency recruited him for what they called Operation Ember Veil, Cole was 34 years old, running a small survival training school in the mountains of Montana, living quietly and deliberately far from the world that had consumed most of his adult life. He had left the Corps 18 months earlier, not because he was broken, not because the wars had hollowed him out the way they had hollowed out so many of his brothers, but because something had shifted in him. Something quiet and certain. He had started asking questions that men in his position were not supposed to ask. Questions about why certain targets were selected. Questions about who benefited from specific operations. Questions that made his commanding officers uncomfortable and his intelligence handlers nervous. When the DIA came to his door on a cold October morning, the man who knocked was named Peterson. Medium height, forgettable face, the kind of man who blended into every room he entered. Peterson was carrying a thin manila folder and wearing a suit that cost more than Cole's truck. He sat at Cole's kitchen table, drank the coffee Cole offered without commenting on the quality, and laid out the mission with the clinical precision of someone reading a grocery list. There was a man. A high-value target operating deep inside a hostile region along the Syrian and Turkish border. His name was Rashid Kamal, a weapons broker and intelligence courier who had been responsible for facilitating the movement of American military secrets to 3 different adversarial governments over the past 4 years. He was believed to be operating out of a fortified compound in a mountainous region that was inaccessible by air without triggering regional radar systems. Ground teams had tried twice to get close enough for a viable operation. Both times, the teams had been compromised before they reached the target zone. One team lost 2 men. The other barely made it out alive. Cole was being asked to go in alone. Disguised as a Jordanian arms dealer named Yusuf Haddad, a legend so carefully constructed that it included 3 years of digital footprint, 2 references from actual arms dealers who had been quietly recruited as unwitting cooperators, and a series of introductory contacts already seeded into Kamal's network. Cole would enter the region through Turkey, make his way south through established smuggling corridors, and integrate himself into the outer edges of Kamal's operation. Once he had earned enough trust to gain proximity to the target, he would eliminate Kamal and extract through a prearranged corridor to a secondary pickup point 12 kilometers east. The timeline was 48 hours from point of entry to extraction. The authorization level was so high that Peterson could not actually name the official who signed off on it. Cole looked at the folder for a long time after Peterson finished talking. Then he looked out the window at the Montana mountains, white-capped and permanent and indifferent to the small dramas of men. He asked 2 questions. First, he asked what happened to the previous teams that failed. Peterson said they were reassigned. His eyes did not waver when he said it, but something in the flatness of the response told Cole everything. Reassigned was intelligence language for quietly disappeared. Second, Cole asked why him, why now, why alone? Peterson smiled for the first time and said because you are the only person alive who can actually do this. Cole took the mission. Not because he fully believed Peterson. Not because the money was significant, though it was. He took it because Rashid Kamal was real, the damage Kamal had done was real, and somewhere in Cole's chest the old conviction still burned, quiet but unextinguished. Some things were worth protecting. Some work still needed doing. He spent 2 weeks in a safe house outside of Ankara being transformed. His hair was darkened and cut differently. His skin was treated to deepen its tone. He memorized 600 hours of Yusuf Haddad's manufactured life until the fabricated memories felt more immediate than his real ones. He practiced his Arabic until the regional dialect sat naturally in his mouth. He studied Kamal's known associates, their mannerisms, their loyalties, their hierarchies, their pressure points. He memorized the compound's layout from satellite imagery until he could navigate it blindfolded. He ran the operation in his mind so many times that by the time he crossed the border, he did not feel like a man going into hostile territory. He felt like a man going home to a place he had never actually been. The crossing went smoothly. The smuggling corridor was exactly as described, a well-worn route through mountain passes that had been used for centuries to move goods, people, and secrets across borders that existed only on paper. Cole moved through it over the course of 2 nights, resting during the days in prearranged safehouses that were nothing more than stone rooms with straw on the floor and the smell of old fires in the walls. He made his first contact with Kamal's network on the 3rd day, a meeting in a tea house in a small mountain town, arranged through a middleman who knew Yusuf Haddad by reputation only. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Cole drank 3 glasses of sweet tea, spoke carefully and deliberately, allowed the other man to lead the conversation, and by the time they parted ways, he had been invited to a gathering at the compound 3 days later. It was almost too easy. That was the first thing that scratched at the back of his mind like a splinter under skin. Intelligence operations rarely ran this cleanly. The corridors were open. The contacts materialized as expected. Every step of the operation felt as though the path had been swept clear ahead of him. Cole pushed the feeling down and stayed in motion. The compound was everything the satellite imagery had suggested and more. Situated in a natural bowl between 2 ridgelines, it consisted of a central building surrounded by 4 outbuildings, all connected by covered walkways that provided protection from aerial surveillance. The perimeter was guarded by 12 men in rotating shifts, well-armed and disciplined, not the careless militia security that characterized lower-level operations. These men were professionals. Whatever Kamal was moving, it was valuable enough to warrant serious protection. Cole spent the first day at the compound as Yusuf Haddad the merchant, charming and careful, listening more than he spoke, building trust through the slow and deliberate currency of patience. He ate meals with the guards, shared cigarettes on the covered walkways, told stories about arms deals in Lebanon and Libya that were close enough to the truth to be convincing. Kamal himself appeared briefly on the first evening, a compact and watchful man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and the contained energy of someone who had survived in dangerous business by never fully relaxing. He assessed Cole from across the room with the practiced efficiency of a man who had identified threats his entire life and shook his hand without warmth but without hostility either. Cole filed everything away. On the second night, Cole identified his window. Kamal had a routine. At 11 in the evening, after his last communications of the day, he walked alone to the eastern outbuilding which served as his private office and remained there for approximately 45 minutes before retiring. The path from the main building to the outbuilding crossed a narrow open courtyard. It was a 90-meter shot from the shadow of the northern wall. Clean angle. No obstructions. A shot Cole could make in his sleep. He spent the afternoon preparing, memorizing guard rotations, identifying his exit route, confirming the bearing to his extraction corridor. Everything was in place. He was ready. And then the note arrived. He was standing in the marketplace of the small town adjacent to the compound, buying provisions for the evening meal as Yusuf Haddad would naturally do, when he felt something slip into the inside pocket of his jacket. The movement was so practiced, so quick, that he did not even see the hand. He kept walking. He did not reach for the note. He finished his shopping, returned to the compound, excused himself to use the bathroom, and unfolded the paper in the dim light of the stone outhouse. 7 words, handwritten in English in a careful, unhurried script. The target knows you are here. Run. Cole read the note 3 times. Then he burned it with the lighter he carried as part of his Haddad cover. He stood in the darkness for 60 seconds, breathing deliberately, forcing his mind through the possibilities with the same systematic patience he would use to calculate a long-range shot in crosswind. Someone inside Kamal's network knew who he was. Either he had been identified, which would mean he was already dead unless someone chose not to expose him immediately, or someone inside the network was trying to warn him. The second possibility was more unsettling than the first because it implied a layer of complexity that the mission briefing had not accounted for. He returned to the evening meal. He laughed at the right moments. He ate everything on his plate. He watched Kamal with the same careful peripheral attention he always used, looking for any shift in behavior, any tightening of the atmosphere around the man that would indicate Cole had been made. There was nothing obvious. But there was something. A conversation between 2 of the senior guards that stopped the moment Cole came within earshot. A look exchanged between Kamal and a man Cole had not seen before, a heavy-set figure who had arrived that afternoon and whose presence had not been explained. Cole decided to move up his timeline by 12 hours. He would take the shot that night, during the first guard rotation when the northern courtyard was briefly unmonitored, and begin his extraction immediately. He went to his sleeping quarters and lay in the darkness, running the sequence of events through his mind with surgical precision. In 3 hours, it would be over. That was when the second revelation hit him. It arrived not as information from outside but as a realization from within, the slow collision of facts he had been carrying separately finally meeting in the center of his thinking. The mission had been too clean. The corridors too open. The introductions too smooth. And now someone inside the compound was warning him rather than exposing him, which meant whoever sent that note had reason to want him alive and operational. That was not the behavior of an enemy. That was the behavior of someone who needed Cole to succeed for reasons of their own. Cole had been in this kind of territory before. Not geographically but operationally. He had felt this specific texture of wrongness once, during his second year with the Corps, on a mission in Helmand province that was later quietly classified at a level so high that none of the participants were permitted to discuss it even among themselves. The same quality of engineered ease. The same sense that the path ahead had been pre-swept. That mission had ended with Cole discovering mid-operation that the target he was sent to eliminate had been a cooperating asset for a rival intelligence faction, and that his own command had known this and sent him anyway, using the mission as cover for something else entirely. Cole sat up in the darkness of his sleeping quarters in Kamal's compound and allowed himself to think the thought he had been keeping at arm's length since Peterson's cold October morning visit in Montana. What if he was not here to kill Kamal? What if he was here to be seen? What if the entire purpose of Operation Ember Veil was to demonstrate to Kamal and his network that the United States was willing and able to penetrate their operation, not as a prelude to eliminating them, but as a negotiating gesture? What if Cole was the message, not the messenger? And if that was true, then once the message was delivered, Cole Mercer became a liability. A witness. A loose end with a face and a conscience and a history of asking uncomfortable questions. He was not a sniper on a mission. He was a sacrifice in a political arrangement. The certainty of this settled over him not with panic but with the cold, clarifying anger of a man who has been underestimated one time too many. Cole had built his entire career on reading environments accurately. On seeing exactly what was in front of him rather than what he had been told to expect. And what was in front of him now, stripped of every layer of cover story and mission briefing, was a betrayal so deliberate and so calculated that it carried its own kind of awful artistry. He had 45 minutes before the guard rotation. Cole made a decision that he had never made in 11 years of operational service. He rewrote the mission entirely. Not for the day. Not for Peterson and his $1,000 suit and his manila folder and his carefully flat eyes. For himself. For the principle that had driven him into the Marine Corps at 18 and had never actually left him, even during the 18 months in Montana when he had been trying to convince himself it had. He moved through the compound in darkness with the fluid economy of motion that years of training had made instinctive. He did not go to the northern courtyard. Instead he went to Kamal's private office, not to kill the man but to find whatever Kamal was holding that made him valuable enough to protect with 12 professional guards and worth the construction of an operation this elaborate. If the DIA had burned Cole to keep Kamal operational, there was a reason. And Cole intended to know what it was before he disappeared. What he found in the outbuilding office in 23 minutes of careful, methodical searching changed everything he thought he understood about Operation Ember Veil. Kamal was not simply a weapons broker. He was a custodian. Hidden behind a false wall in the eastern corner of the office was a fireproof document safe containing 5 years of recorded communications between Kamal's network and a series of American contacts whose credentials, if genuine, represented a penetration of U.S. intelligence infrastructure so deep and so sustained that it bordered on catastrophic. Names. Dates. Transaction records. Meeting locations on American soil. This was not a backroom political deal. This was something close to treason, and Cole was holding the evidence of it in his hands. He understood now why previous ground teams had been compromised. They had not been compromised by Kamal's security. They had been compromised by the people who sent them. Every team that got close enough to this office was burned before they could find what Cole was now holding. He photographed everything with the miniature camera built into his watch, a piece of equipment he had requested as a seemingly routine addition to his kit and which no one had questioned. He replaced everything exactly as he had found it. He left the office without a trace of his presence. And then Cole Mercer did something that no extraction plan, no contingency protocol, no DIA playbook had ever prepared for. He took a third path. Not the extraction corridor 12 kilometers east, which he now understood was almost certainly monitored by the people who sent him. Not back into Kamal's compound, which would eventually become a trap. Cole went north, into the mountains, alone, carrying nothing but his tactical kit, the photographic evidence on his watch, and 43 years of accumulated understanding of how to survive in places that wanted him dead. He moved through the night for 6 hours, covering terrain that would have defeated most men with a full kit and a clear objective. Cole moved it with nothing but the stars and his own internal compass, a skill his father had given him on those Kentucky summer nights that now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. By dawn he was 11 kilometers from the compound and climbing. By the second night he had crossed into a region where Kamal's people would not follow and the DIA's reach was thin and slow. On the fourth day, he made contact with the only person he fully trusted. Not an intelligence handler. Not a former commanding officer. A woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, a former JAG attorney turned investigative journalist who had spent 8 years documenting exactly the kind of institutional corruption that was now sitting on Cole's wrist in photographic form. He had met her 3 years earlier when she was working on a story about contractor deaths in Afghanistan. He had not given her anything at the time. He had simply recognized in her the same quality he recognized in himself. The refusal to look away from what was actually there. He sent her the files through a channel so obscure that it took her 48 hours to confirm they were real. Her response was 3 words. I have it. 2 weeks later, the story broke across every major publication in the country simultaneously. The documentation was so thorough, so meticulously sourced, so irrefutable that even the agencies with the most to lose could not get ahead of it quickly enough to contain it. Congressional hearings were announced within 72 hours. 3 senior officials were placed on administrative leave. Peterson's real name appeared in the reporting. So did the names of the American contacts in Kamal's files. Cole Mercer watched none of it. By the time the story broke, he was somewhere that did not exist on any current map, in a place he had prepared for exactly this kind of contingency, living under a name that even he sometimes had to remind himself to answer to. He was not hiding in fear. He was choosing invisibility the same way he had always chosen it, deliberately, strategically, on his own terms. The DI launched a search that was classified at such a high level that the search itself became a subject of the congressional investigation. They never found him. Not because Cole Mercer was running. But because Cole Mercer had spent his entire adult life mastering the art of being exactly where he chose to be and nowhere else. He had walked into the enemy's shadows at the request of men who had no intention of walking him back out. He had found their secrets in those shadows. And then he had used those shadows to vanish so completely that the people who sent him there were left searching for a ghost they had created themselves. Somewhere in the mountains, in the clean cold air of a place without names, Cole Mercer sat very still and listened to the wind move through the trees above him. He was not a weapon anymore. He was not a message or a sacrifice or a classified asset. He was a man in the mountains, which was where the whole thing had started, and there was something in that completion that felt, if not like peace, then at least like truth. The agency that burned him was unraveling on a news cycle he could not see. The evidence he had risked everything to recover was doing the work he had intended it to do. And Cole Mercer, the sniper who had walked into enemy shadows at the request of his own government, had disappeared into those shadows so thoroughly and so intentionally that even those who knew his name could not say with certainty whether he was watching them or simply gone. He was both. That was the thing they would never fully understand about a man like Cole. The ghost and the man had never been separate. The disappearance was not an ending. It was a strategy. And Cole Mercer had never in his life taken a shot without knowing exactly where he intended it to land. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the country you are watching from right now. Are you watching from New York, Texas, California, Florida, the Midwest, the South, or somewhere in between? We want to hear from every corner of this great country. And if this story moved you, if it stayed with you the way these stories are meant to, hit that subscribe button for your mom and dad. Show them some love. Every subscriber on this channel is a tribute to the people who raised us and the men and women who protect us. We will see you in the next one.